Europe, etc. And I think that the power of the imagination is what we learn most from the Black women writers we are thinking about during this series. And Toni Morrison's insistence on addressing pressing social issues in her work, and attempting to convey how her own fiction takes on what she called the house that race built. Many of you have probably read that collection of essays that came out of a conference that happened some years ago called The House That Race Built. She insists on the relevance of her use of a house-home antagonism. And I'm quoting from her contribution to that collection. So much of what seems to lie about in discourses on race concerns legitimacy, authenticity, community, belonging. In no small way, these discourses are about home. And home is the title of her essay, by the way. An intellectual home, a spiritual home, family and community as home, forced and displaced labor in the destruction of home, creative responses to exile, the devastations, pleasures, and imperatives of homelessness as it is manifested in discussions on feminism, globalism, the diaspora, migration, hybridity, contingency, interventions, assimilations, exclusions. The estranged body, the legislated body, the violated, rejected, deprived body, the body as consummate home. In virtually all of these formations, whatever the terrain, race magnifies the matter that matters. And in this essay, Toni Morrison writes about the prison house of racism, but also the prison house of language. The problems of academic language, expository language, which is incapable of accomplishing what can be achieved in the aesthetic dimension through art, through creative writing. And I think that writing projects that are emancipatory, and this is certainly what many of the women who are potential participants in this series have in common, writing as an important dimension of collective aspirations toward freedom. Writing projects that are emancipatory influence in very concrete ways the trajectories of collective movements for freedom. They influence and are influenced by those movements. This is a wonderful dialectical relationship that is always in the making. And so I think what the African feminist scholar, Amina Mama, says about scholars is also applicable to creative writing. So she's writing about the intellectual tradition of African scholarship, and she says it is largely progressive in its orientation. This is not a tradition defined by conventional and obedient, discipline-based academic study. I would describe it as a critical tradition premised on an ethic of freedom. Such scholarship regards itself as integral to the struggle for freedom and holds itself accountable not to a particular institution, regime, class, or gender, but to the imagination, aspirations, and interests of ordinary people. It is a tradition some would call radical, as it seeks to be socially and politically responsible in more than a neutral or liberal sense. It is guided by an ethic that requires scholars to be identified with and grounded in the broad landscape of Africa's liberation and democracy movements. So I bring the scholar, researcher, Amina Mama into the frame because I think it is important for us to be cognizant of the part feminism liberatory tradition of women writers of African descent. Here in the US, the emergence of a late 20th century tradition of Black women writers was very much linked to the emergence of a feminism that has insisted on what we now call intersectionality. That has insisted on thinking together those things that are normally thought apart, and that also insists on disarticulating those things that are often held together. I remember the impact of Barbara Christian's Black woman novels and her book Black Feminist Criticism that helped to forge a tradition that placed in conversation writers like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and Gail Jones and Toni Cade Bambara, and forged a tradition that can be called Black feminists. And in that context, many people are not aware of the role that Toni Morrison played in the forging of that tradition, not only through her own writing, and of course through her own writing, The Blue Is I and Sula especially, but as an editor. She was the first publisher of Toni Cade Bambara. She also published Gail Jones. Gail Jones might never have been published had it not been for the fact that Toni Morrison was an editor at Random House and agreed to publish Gail Jones' novel Corregidora. And I knew this because Toni Morrison was my editor. She was the one who persuaded me to write my autobiography. And I did not think that as a person under 30, that I really had anything to say as far as an autobiography was concerned. And I remember a number of arguments with her. Well, you know, don't most people write their autobiographies when they're older and when they're wiser? And I'm glad I didn't wait. Because I probably would have become too wise to write an autobiography. But I mentioned the development of a Black feminist tradition, which was global in scope, including writers like Bessie Head, for example. I'm thinking of Ken Bugul, who's Mariette Toumbay Idioma, and her wonderful Abandoned Baobab. And I'm also thinking of Nawal El-Saadawi, because I think it's really important that we see North Africa in relation to this tradition as well. And in many ways, the Occupy movement builds on many of the insights and imaginations of Black feminists and feminists of color. And I'm not sure about the extent to which people are aware of the relationship between Black feminism, women of color feminism, in the 70s, 80s especially, and the kinds of practices and theories that later came to be taken for granted. And so when we talk about bringing a whole range of issues together, this was at one time seen